is a writer and an educator and a social justice advocate right here in Burlington, Massachusetts. She also founded Burlington Buzz about a year ago, which is an online community news publication that seeks to bring together our community and inform residents about things that are going on in local government and also about local events. Nicci left her full-time job in 2018 to focus on her writing. And since then, her work has been featured in Zibby Mag, Human Parts, Mamma Mia, and other publications. And her 2021 essay, A Mother's Work is Everything, was a semi-finalist in the Medium Writers Challenge. Her work focuses on motherhood and womanhood and connection. And it explores the gray areas of life that a lot of us often don't want to look too closely at. When We Were Mothers, her debut novel, hopes to spark dialogue about reproductive rights and bodily autonomy without the emotions that we often deal with when associated with today's political climate. So, please join me in welcoming author Nicci Kadilak.
Hi guys! Yay! It's such a warm room, so I'm so not nervous at all. Thank you everybody for coming. I am going to go ahead and start off with some readings from the book and a little bit of editorializing, because that's my favorite thing in the world to do. And then I will sit with Barbara and we'll have a conversation, and then I'll do a Q&A, and then we'll do some signatures, and you're going to enjoy this beautiful Saturday afternoon. So when I set out to write this book, I was not trying to write a book that had anything to do with politics, that had anything to do with feminism. Really, I just had a question in my mind. And the question was, what if there were artificial wombs that were available to us on a commercial level? Like, that would be kind of cool, right? If we knew, especially because I've been pregnant many times, and it is real hard to be at peace when you're pregnant because you are always worried about something going wrong. You always want to know. There's that anxiety. If you haven't felt that, if any pregnant person ever has not felt that, I just want to know what their secret is, because like the entire 9 months of every one of my pregnancies was like that. And so I really wanted to explore a way where you could just know what's going on, right? You can know what's be reassured that everything's okay. And so that's sort of where the idea of this book got started. But it turned into so much more than that. And so I want to start out by talking about Lucinda. She is what I would consider the main character, although there are two main characters in this book, but she really is like the blinking, green light, I guess, for the story. And when this book starts, she knows who she is. She knows what her place is in this world. She's a leader of an underground movement. She's somebody who's going to take rights back for all women, and she's really determined to do that, right? So we're going to start with Lucinda. It's been 6 years since Lucinda lived up here with Zavi, passing the most conspicuous months of her pregnancy under lock and key as they waited for Serafina to be born. But she's no stranger to these rooms. She returns often and gives what she can to whatever sister is in residence. A checkup, some company, anything to add some color to 3 long months with nothing to do but watch her belly grow and wait. Celeste, she calls, and the insulated walls drink in the sound. Just a minute, says Celeste from the bedroom. She sounds in good spirits. Must not be too far along. Lucinda rounds the burgundy sofa, pacing her usual path around the living room while she waits. The network of flowers embroidered on the drapery draws her near, a surrogate for the open air on the other side of the picture window. The tapestry is a controlled chaos of blossoms, but in the rectangular halo of moonlight spilling in around the edges, only the purple lotuses shimmer. Lucinda traces a petal with her fingertip. The flowers are supposed to suggest comfort and peace, but to Lucinda they only ever signaled isolation. An old whisper urges her to rip open the curtains and thrust her head out, sucking in deep gulps of cool autumn air, the scent of the river in the distance. But Lucinda is free to come and go as she pleases. Celeste is the one tucked in here now, though maybe not for long. The message chimed through Lucinda's darkened bedroom an hour ago. Maybe you should come. She threw on leggings and an oversized black sweatshirt from the pile in the closet floor, finger-combed her hair, and cursed the auto chef for being out of coffee. Even uncaffeinated, she must have set a record for fastest trip to the greenhouse. "Come on," she said, as the elevator's authenticator took far too long to scan her in. She hardly registered the canopy around her, inky black in the dim light of the emergency exit signs as she rose through the glass tube to the secured berthing floor. Can it be time already? Celeste's body offered no hint yesterday evening as they and their sisters worked the ground in their family garden plot on the lower level, or as she ambled away toward the elevator that would return her to her temporary home up here. Things change quickly, though, as her mother never fails to remind her it's important to always be prepared. The bedroom door opens and Lucinda turns to see Celeste in the doorway, bracing herself against the wooden frame. Her eyes and nose scrunch up. Ooh! She stands there for a moment, breathing deep and deliberate, and Lucinda looks her over. Her belly hangs lower now. Her stance is wider. Celeste was right to call Lucinda. There's a good chance this baby will be here today. Celeste straightens and takes a deep breath, then blows it out through pursed lips. "You okay?" says Lucinda. Celeste's smile is radiant, as always. "Yeah," she says, "it's been coming and going for a while now. That was a good one, though." She glides toward Lucinda, more graceful on the brink of labor than Lucinda's been in all her life. Celeste settles onto the sofa after much shifting, and Lucinda sits opposite her. Their bodies angle comfortably toward each other like when they were 12 years old and gossiping about the gym teacher or the cute boy who winked at Lucinda in math class. "Babe," Martin's voice sounds from the bedroom, "you forgot your electrolyte water." He comes over and hands Celeste the glass, kissing the blonde curls piled on top of her head. "Hey, Lucinda," he says with a nervous wave. His eyes are clear, considering the hour, quite a contrast to Zavi snoring in a tangle of sheets and heavy blankets when she left. "Thanks, babe," Celeste says. "Now go back to sleep." Martin grins. "How could I sleep at a time like this? Not gonna happen. But I'll leave you to talk. I'll be in the bedroom watching those old documentaries on childbirth if you need me." He kisses Celeste again and is gone. Celeste chuckles and rolls her eyes. "Hope you catch something you missed the first 20 times, she says after him. When the door closes behind him, Lucinda says, "How's he been coping with the seclusion?" "Are you kidding?" Celeste laughs. "You know Martin. He's so worried something will go wrong. He's been trying to wrap me in a bubble for 9 months. I think he secretly loves having me locked in here." Lucinda has seen her fair share of nervous partners since she had Serafina, the first natural birth in 100 years. But Martin wins the award for most anxious. Celeste glances back at the door. "I'm sure once the baby comes and we get back home, everything will go back to normal." Lucinda smiles. "Soon enough," she says. But the word rings in her ears. Normal? When have things ever been normal for her? In her earliest memories, she kneels next to Celeste and their sisters in the garden as the mother's murmurs drift through the empty space. Though they were too young to grasp most of the conversation floating around them, certain words were unmistakable, different, special. Never once were they called normal. So right off, you get this sense that we're in a different place, right? You're in a different world. This is not a place that we recognize yet. And as you learn more through the story and start to think about it, it's not a place that we recognize yet, but we recognize it as a place we could eventually get to. And so this is sort of a glimpse into the world. And that's Lucinda. So then we meet a couple of Lucinda's people. And we get to know some of the relationships that she has in this story. So, when you see her at the beginning, she is who she is. She is who she's always thought and been taught that she needs to be. And then we meet Mom, and then we meet Aster. So this is a shorter one, and we'll introduce you to these two. They're at a bar, so she's taken a break from the labor process. She knows it's going to be a while. So she texts one of their friends, Aster, and says, "Why don't you meet me at the bar?" It's an all-hours bar, so it's like 3 a.m. They're having some coffee. So this is the first time you get to meet her. Up on the automated level, Lucinda sits at a high table in a corner. Her mobile buzzes again. "Hot coffee, 2 cream, 1 sugar, repeat order?" She taps yes, then replays Serafina's goodnight message from her parents' place last night. Sarah's shaky hand brings Lucinda around the apartment where she grew up. And then the frame steadies as Sarah hands the phone over and proudly holds up the new game Grandma and Papa bought her for her visit. Lucinda smiles at her little girl's glee as she pushes down a twinge of resentment. There are more toys and games in her parents' house now than when she actually lived there, when a child actually lived there. "Good night, Mama, love you," says Serafina, and then Ruma's face appears in the frame. Lucinda flicks the message off. "Yeah, Mom, I get it," Lucinda says under her breath. At the gathering last night, Lucinda made the mistake of oversimplifying an explanation for the children while her mother was within earshot. She's already heard the reprimands twice, one in front of the rest of the sisters, and again at the end of Seraphina's message. No need to subject herself to them again. The silver door in the wall opens onto a steaming mug. Her thawing fingers burn against the ceramic, but warmth seeps through her body as the coffee moves down to her stomach. As the heat creeps in, she sits back and surveys the floor. A soccer game from across the world plays on the wall screen for a single viewer, a droopy, middle-aged man grasping at a pint glass at the long bar. A young couple sits in a booth, both men on the same side of the table, touching foreheads and nuzzling their noses together. "How cute are they?" Aster says, sliding into the seat opposite Lucinda. Her hair is blue today, shaved on one side and braided over her other shoulder, though nothing holds it in place and it's already loosening at the ends. Her eyes are a startling shade of red. "Have you gotten any sleep at all?" Lucinda asks. Aster grins. "Not much. Stayed out late with some of my new work friends. Turns out lawyers really know how to party." She lowers her eyes to her mobile and types in her order. "So you think this is it?" she says, gesturing toward the space where Celeste would normally be seated. Lucinda and her sisters had known each other forever, attended each other's births and weddings and graduations. Eventually, they will grow old and die together, leaving their children to keep their shared secrets. As the originals, Aster, Lucinda, and Celeste have shared a special closeness. Playdates during their elementary school days, bowling and movies as teens, exercise classes and dinner parties as they've grown, subdued, unfrequent all-hours bells is just the latest place they've settled. The perfect place to talk without being overheard. Maybe next time they're here, things will be back to normal and Celeste will be able to come. Normal. There's that word again. She shakes the echo from her mind and turns to Aster. "I think it might be. You excited?" "Sure, I guess," Aster replies, retrieving a glass filled with ice and dark liquid from the compartment and taking a long pull. Whether it's coffee or bourbon or both, Lucinda can't tell. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lucinda asks. Aster shrugs, her upper lip curling. "You know how I feel about that shit, Lucinda. I'll never be comfortable with it." Sisters begin preparing for what mothers call the beautiful and natural act of childbearing from their earliest days. Aster, though, has never been very, very enthusiastic about the idea, and it's always felt like Lucinda's job to convince her their path is the right one. Lucinda was certain after watching their sisters give birth, Aster would warm up to the beauty of it all. But if anything, the opposite has happened. Lucinda leans close and keeps her volume down. "Aster, after all we've seen, don't you think it's amazing what our bodies can do?" Why ask it as a question? She already knows the answer. The silence between them stretches. The wall screen flashes with an advertisement, the sound combining with the bar's ambient music in an unintelligible jumble. Aster shrugs. "Sure, it's amazing, but also it seems, unnecessarily hard." "What does?" Lucinda says, as if the conversation hasn't played out in 100 different ways over the years. "Come on, Lucinda, the hiding, the isolation, knowing the agony you have waiting for you at the end, the risk to your life and the babies. If you just did things the modern way, you'd avoid all that." It's not that Aster's points aren't valid. Nothing about this life has been easy. Lucinda has spent most of her years terrified and lonely, from having monthly cycles when all the women around her were safeguarded, to being the first person in generations to become pregnant and give birth, going through every step without the support of someone who had been through it before, because there was no one alive who had. But their work is important. Bringing this essential function back to humanity, taking back their natural giving capabilities, and helping others to do the same, that has validated the struggle 100 times over, and she knows their sisters would agree. So now you can get a kind of a sense of what's going on here and what the dynamics are, right? And I have to say, when I started this book, Lucinda wasn't even in it. When I started to draft the novel, she wasn't even a character. I was really a lot more interested in what happened in society to sort of bring us to this point and what happened to create this society. But once I really figured out that she needed to be the person telling the story, all of those complex interrelationships between the women in the story really came to life. So I think I'll stop there just so we can have a lot of time for conversation and questions. I would love to read to you about Emeka. So if you want to take a look at the beginning of chapter 2, feel free after this is over. But I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to chat with Barbara.
All right. Well, I have lots of questions. I have read this book twice now, and I enjoyed it as much the second time as I did the first. And in fact, I found that I felt differently about the characters the second time than I did the first time. But both times, what I think is the mark of a really good story is that after I read it, I found myself thinking about the characters and thinking about the themes of the book days and even weeks afterwards. Things would pop into my head, and I think that's a sign of a really compelling story. But let's start at the very beginning. Nicci, have you always wanted to be an author?
The answer is kind of like yes and no. On my website, I actually updated my bio recently because I was sort of remembering like the first story I remember writing, and it was in second grade, and I had written this like cute short story. We were just working on narrative writing. I'm a teacher, so I like it, to me in retrospect, it's very obvious what was going on. But as a 7-year-old, I was really like, I thought this story was really cool. It was really cute. It was a bug trapped in a juice box. And its journey to get out of the juice box. So that's probably the last story in like 25, 30 years that I actually finished, because I had always kept starting things and never finishing them. So I was going through my attic like a year and a half ago and found a whole box full of stories, books, poems, like all of these things I had started, and they were really good. I'm like, I want to know what happens next. And there was no ending. It was not even a middle. It was just like a really compelling hook. And so the short answer is I have wanted to be a writer, but I never really thought, especially after I sort of went to college, for neuroscience, because like you do, and then became an educator after that. So I've been teaching for almost 20 years. So it didn't really occur to me that I could become a writer. And then one day on the train, I started a story, and here I am.
Well, that is the perfect lead into my next question, because I'm curious to know, I understand from what you told us how this idea came to you.
Yeah.
But I think many of us have what we think would be great ideas for books, don't you all, right? But how do you take that idea, that kernel of an idea, and turn it into a book?
So my answer to that would be different today than it was 4 years ago when I started writing this book. But my answer that I would give to other authors is like, start with a question, start with a what if, and just keep just going deeper into that, right? Dig into that what if we could know what's going on inside our bodies during pregnancy? What if that was the only way that we could do it? What if the government required that of us? What if there was a group of people who didn't want to do that, and what happens after that? And so the what if is like the beginning point, but then there really has to be some idea of like, what are the stakes, right? And so what is the major conflict? And so I started writing the story, and it was like, for me, it really interesting. But I think somebody picking it up from the outside would be like, nothing's happening. It's just kind of a rumination of like what, some things that might happen in the future if we don't, watch ourselves. But I think, like really focusing on what's the conflict, and then how does the person change? How does the main character change over the course of the story? What are they struggling with at the beginning that they might not even know, right? Lucinda doesn't know that she's struggling with her identity at the beginning of the story, but it sure enough is a struggle for her. And what happens at the end, and how do they kind of find a resolution to that conflict?
Okay, very interesting. So you talked a little bit about how you came up with the idea of the artificial womb, which I think many of us sometimes think about because it's, as you said, we all wish we had a window into that world when we're carrying a baby. How did you come up with the idea of safeguarding?
Oh, it's kind of a cheat answer. Like that's because that's the only, not the only way, but it's the easiest way to make the story work. Mm-hmm. Right? So there has to be some sort of like raising the stakes. And I think that raising the stakes, and also, I'm not going to lie, hi, baby. That's my son over there. He just popped back out. I think that, oh man, he made me lose my train of thought. I'm not going to lie, there's definitely allegories to the way we treat women as nuisances, menstruation as a nuisance, and the sort of way we just really don't embrace our womanness, you know what I mean, in society. And so there's that, and then there there are other things that I'm not going to talk about right now, but
Okay.
yeah, I think probably like it was one of the question of like raising the stakes, right? You've got to make it, suspend disbelief a little bit, but make it realistic enough, especially thinking about the way our society is going right now. And like, I remember I started writing this before Amy Coney Barrett went on the Supreme Court, before Brett Kavanaugh went on the Supreme Court, before Roe versus Wade was overturned. But as I was writing it, all of those things were happening, and I was like, oh damn, like maybe like it's not that far fetched of an idea that the government gets involved in this way. And so that's where we are.
Okay. Taking a step back from the central conflict for a minute, I enjoyed the world that you built that was different from the world we're living in. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you came up with all of those differences.
Yeah, okay. So a few things that I felt were, what's the word, like natural progressions of where we are in the world right now. Self-driving cars is a really easy example, right? In 100 years, we will just have self-driving cars. Like, there's not even a question in my mind that we're just going to have autonomous vehicles. You're not even going to necessarily have to buy your own car. You can just like hail a car and it'll take you to where you need, especially in big cities. And so, the story happens in a big city, and I just think it's just like totally a no-brainer that it's going to happen. Tell me I'm crazy in 100 years if it doesn't happen, but I do see that on the horizon. And then things like the auto chef, which like, I mean, the auto chef becomes a little bit of like a parallel to the nursery womb almost.
I want one.
I want one too. I mean, really, you just put, and you just get what you want. It's like an espresso machine, but like for all of your food. It's really nice. So, I wanted the world to be recognizable to us, right? There's no need to create a totally brand new, this isn't a fantasy novel, right? So I'm not trying to create a brand new world where you have to like learn everything about it, right? We're not living in sky houses and, going back and forth to the moon for work or anything like that. But I wanted it to be different enough so that you would know that this is a different world. This is a world of the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just small tweaks to the world that we live in now, I thought was a good balance.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, along that line, and this is one I'm throwing out there because it was not on our pre-approved list.
All right.
But that's what you were saying just sparked it in my mind. Talk to me about the overlays.
Oh, yeah. All right. So that was another thing that I thought I actually seen it. Funny enough, I don't know how many of you have watched Divergent. You can come say hi if you want to, buddy. Hi. I don't know how many of you watched Divergent, but on Divergent there was a, hey buddy, you come here. What's going on, dude? You say hi to everybody? No. No? All right, we'll go play?
Can I have a drink for?
Yeah, you can take it to Daddy. Daddy will open it for you. Bye-bye. I love you. Thank you. On Divergent, there's a scene where, oh my gosh, what's her name? Somebody help me. Shailene Woodley's character, her name is...
I can't remember.
Oh my gosh. Okay, the main character. We'll just call her the main character. I'll remember it in 5 minutes. But where she goes and she named herself. What's her freaking name?
I can't remember. I read the book.
Right?
I didn't see the movie.
She goes to, thank you, Barbara. Barbara's Googling it for me. She goes to like fight on the front lines, and they give her this pair of glasses that she can put on, and all of a sudden she can see information about everything around her. And I kind of got the idea from that, where like in a society, you think of Google Glass and other different enhanced automation. Say it again.
Is it Beatrice?
Triss. Yep, she calls herself Triss. That's right. Thank you. So, that's another thing that in 100 years, like, I don't really foresee that being, like, even a question, that something like that is going to exist. And the question is, like, how ubiquitous is it going to be? And so in this story, like, it's pretty ubiquitous, right? And so it really is. I envision it in a lot of different ways, but in order to explain it and describe it in literal form on the pages, I had to make some tweaks. And so they turn into be glasses, and you can use an enhanced overlay. So you just push a button, and it gives you all sorts of information. It tells you the soil, oxygen, nitrogen level of the plants that you're working with, or it tells you if you're a police officer, you have an extra law enforcement enhancement, and it will tell you if a person has a warrant out or something like that, because you've got all this technology to sort of help this is another kind of theme in the story, is like you have all the technology that can help you, but also it can increase monitoring and give you so much less privacy than what you have, right? You have implants that monitor your health, but also track your location, right? So there's no question. If somebody wants to know where, if the police want to know where you are, they'll figure it out, right? So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying that. And one of the things that I thought was really important was to have the photogram, which if you haven't read the book, it's like a little tattoo, but it's a cartridge, and you can only see it with the overlay. And so you hold your hand out, or wherever part of your body it's on, and you couldn't see anything to the naked eye, but you can see this tattoo. And I think that will, if the technology ever actually works, I really actually do feel like that's something that people will do, so that they're not permanently marking up their body, but they can, but they can have that kind of artistic license to, express themselves in that way. So I wanted the photogram to be a really big part of the story, and the overlay sort of made that happen, so they kind of worked together in concert. But I really did see this as kind of just a natural extension of where we are in the world. And
Well, the photogram thing really appealed to me as someone who's needle phobic.
Yes.
No tattoos.
Yeah.
Don't like
No,
needles.
it only takes a second. A little cartridge.
So you mentioned when you were talking about the novel in the beginning how there are kind of two main characters,
Yeah.
but neither one is the antagonist, which is a little bit unusual.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you ended up with two protagonists?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that when I first started writing the story, there were like 7 different point of view characters. And if you've ever read a book that goes from 7 different perspectives, it has to be really well done in order to be meaningful. But also each character has to have something to add to the story. And what I realized is that none of the other characters really had much to add. It was like, oh, I introduced this one character, so he'd give you this one piece of background information, and really he didn't need to be have his voice on the page, right? So I eliminated a lot of those voices. So Ruma had a point of view, Elle had a point of view, Clark had a point of view, I think even Nathan McKenzie had a point of view, and then there was Emeka and Lucinda, might have been somebody else, I think there were 6 or 7. And that was the very, very first edit that I did, was just like slash, 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 and figure out how I could take the information that those characters were conveying and just insert it into little snippets throughout the story. And that actually ended up working really well, but I just had this Emeka voice inside me. And so I disagree that he's not an antagonist. I think he is kind of an antagonist.
Okay.
I don't want to give too much away and say anything about the actual antagonist. But I do think like a lot of the tension in that story is the cat and mouse, right? Of Lucinda running and Emeka searching, and them sort of barely missing each other. And but I really just felt like his story added to the narrative, and I thought that highlighting the aspect of like blindly following rules or enforcing rules just because they're rules, like that's no better than any other sort of blind following, right? And so that was really what I wanted to highlight, is that like you've got to question things. Just because something's always been done that way, or just because, oh, this is the law, so we have to X, really that's no reason, right, to continue doing things the way that they're the way that you've been doing them. And so I really wanted to highlight that kind of questioning of authority. If it gets the book banned, it gets the book banned.
That might be a good thing.
Exactly.
Well, actually, your slashing comment is the perfect dovetail into my next question. I would think that as a writer, it would be difficult when you've written a character or when you've written a scene to actually edit it out. I would think would be painful. And how do you deal with that process where you have to eliminate parts of your story that have become part of you, but you need to make it marketable?
So there's a couple different answers to that. One is if you've got just a little bit of a hangover, or if you're just a little sick, like a head cold or something, it makes it actually a lot easier to just be like, I don't give 2 rats behinds about this. Like, it's fine. I can get rid of it. But the truth is that you're in the service of the story, right? And so if you've got a character like Clark, who is an important person, but an incidental character almost in the story. Like, he needs to be in there so you know who he is and his relationship with Lucinda. But he doesn't need a point of view. And so going through, and I had written like chapters and chapters of him setting up the world and talking about his work. He's the director of population science, so he enforces all of the rules and regulations about, you know, childbirth quotas and when can you have your baby? They, you know, rubber stamp your approval. But he was really like a cardboard cutout, right? I didn't really need his voice to be telling me all of those things. And honestly, most of the things never ended up in the story because it was just like background information. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of what you have to think about as a writer is like, what is background that I needed to write? I did need to write those 50,000 words that I deleted from my book. But you didn't need to read it, right? I just needed to write it so I knew where we were in the world, right? And so I think that helped. Now, I don't. Many of you know that I rewrote the beginning. How many times, Becky? The beginning of my book, 13 times. So many times. Yeah, I didn't send them all out either because it was just at some point I was just like, my friends have had enough of me. But like it has to be in the right spot, right? It has to say the right words. It has to have the right information. And you can get tied to, like, I really loved the beautiful description of the garden and the society and all of that. And it was just like boring as hell. And so somebody who enjoys a literary read would read that and go, oh man, this is so beautiful. I love this description. But somebody who wants a suspenseful page turner, which is really what I was trying to write because the market and sold my soul, blah, blah, blah. But somebody who wants that is going to stop reading. If, you know, if they get to a point where they're like, oh, like 10 pages describing this underground garden, like, great, but I don't really care, right? And so, yeah, and I think that I was trying to get an agent at that point. I did not end up getting an agent or going with a traditional publisher. I self-published the book, and I'm super happy and proud with my decision because that's just what needs to happen in today's market. But I did make some of those decisions knowing what the market is and knowing what people are craving, which is these suspenseful page turners. And a lot of people like read it in a day. And then, you know, some people it takes a little bit longer, but for the most part, people are like, I couldn't put it down.
Mm-hmm. So without giving anything away,
yeah, no
do
spoilers.
you save some of those parts?
Yeah.
Or
I do. I have like I do it differently every time I do it, but I like will save my scenes in my writing software, and then I'll either if I know they're never going to see the light of day, I'll send them out to my mailing list for like incentives. If I think that they might go in the prequel or go in a sequel or something like that, I will save it. Generally, nothing gets copied and pasted verbatim. It's just like taking little phrases here and there. So I do save them. It's like a graveyard, though. Like it's like Nicci's old word graveyard that I have.
Okay. Well, let's change gears for a minute. One of the characters that I thought was really interesting, and one that I felt very differently about in the second read than I did in the first read,
maybe because you knew what
was
happened.
was Ruma.
Yeah.
So the question, and I still haven't answered this question for myself, is Ruma a victim?
Yeah.
Or is she
An aggressor.
the aggressor?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Okay.
Talk to me about Ruma.
All right, so I talked about Ruma a little bit before. She's Lucinda's mom. She's the one that's predetermined who Lucinda was going to be, right? She was going to be the first person to give birth naturally in generations, and Ruma was grooming her for that from the day she was before she was born. She had a plan, and you learn a lot about Ruma throughout the course of the story. And you learn about her motivations, which were really, I think, wholesome yet possibly a bit misguided. And so I don't see her as necessarily an aggressor. She did what she needed to do, what she thought she needed to do, in order to make Lucinda the kind of person that she needed to be, in order to carry on this plan, right? As far as being a victim, yeah, I think she was a little bit of a victim. Mm-hmm. I do. Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to say anything else.
Was she a good mother?
Ooh, well.
Trick question.
Yeah. I mean, as all mothers, I think we do what we think is right in the moment, and later on, sometimes we realize that that wasn't the right thing to do. I wonder if she had gotten the chance, if she would have reflected and done things differently. I don't know the answer to that question. I think she did what she thought she needed to do at the time. Maybe like 3 more minutes, maybe one more question.
All right, one more. Oh my goodness, I have so many more than one. All right. Okay, the one that really sticks in my mind, I think, is we see some of these trends today, as you've already talked about. People can choose their baby's gender now. They can eliminate for certain diseases. And it's not hard to imagine that at some point in the near future, people will be able to select other traits.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what we lose when technology actually makes us better.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, I think that the first thing that comes to mind is bias, right? And if we all had the chance, would we choose for lighter skin? Would we choose for lighter hair? Would we choose for bluer eyes? Like, I don't think that that is the definition of beauty, but I do think we're socialized to think that that's the definition of beauty. So I do wonder what would happen if we had the leeway to choose whatever traits we wanted to. Might we choose what society has told us is beautiful? And so that's, I think, probably the biggest thing that bothers me. Like, in the world, you can choose whatever you want as long as that your child will be healthy, and as long as you're using the genes from the parents, not creating something out of thin air. Okay, and so the child will be a combination of the parents, but again, like, where are our biases when we're making those choices? So that's one thing that I think of. And yeah, I think there's so many examples of technology that's there to make things better for us, to make it easier for us, that is really going to screw us in the future if it hasn't already. And you think about, like, PFAS, and you think about BPA, and, like, all of the plastics, all of these things that were just, like, such revolutionary technological feats when they were created, and now they're causing us so many problems. Cancer, just, like, global things. I don't want to say global warming. That's not really what I'm talking about. But I mean, climate change is one thing, but also just waste. There's so much waste that we have. And it really just, like, snowballed into this problem. So probably, like, a very controversial opinion about it, but, like, AI and ChatGPT and all of that, like, I won't use it. I won't go anywhere near it, because I really am worried about what it has the potential to do. It evolves so quickly, and I think that, yes, it's a danger for artists, but I really think it's a danger for humanity. I really do, or potentially anyway, in the future. And so I think that we need to be as thoughtful as possible, and I think we often run into things and just be like, hey, like, let's do this really exciting thing, and we don't really think things through. So that it gives me lots and lots of pause.
I know we're almost out of time, but there's one more thing we have to do before I turn it over to the audience.
Okay.
Let's cast the movie.
Oh, gosh.
Or I should say, you cast the movie. I just want to hear.
Okay, all right. If you have ideas, you can shout them out if you've read the book already. So Lucinda, I do not have a name for, because she, to me, is like a combination of a lot of different people. But the first person that comes to mind is, like, Padma Lakshmi. From Top Chef. She's the host of Top Chef, and she's a model, and she's an overall amazing badass woman. So I think probably I don't even know if she acts, but that's who sort of I see as Lucinda. Emeka for me is always and forever going to be Idris Elba, 100%. I was thinking maybe Lance Reddick. He passed away yesterday, and I'm so sad. We just finished watching The Wire the day before, and it's like his performance in that's so amazing. So yeah, Idris Elba, maybe Padma Lakshmi. There is an actor, and I can't remember her name, but she's Iranian, and her voice just gives me Ruma's voice. I'll have to like go find her.
I think I know who you mean.
Yeah,
she has this deep, rich voice.
Yes,
I know who you mean, and I don't know her name either.
She was the mother in House of Sand and Fog with Ben Kingsley and Jennifer Connelly. I can't remember her name. So I will look into that. So those are my big 3. I don't know if I have anybody for the rest of the people, but I definitely Idris Elba. If I could get Idris Elba to come do my movie, I definitely would get him to do it.
Okay, great. So time for the audience to ask their questions, whether you've read the book or not. Raise your hands.
All right, go ahead, Samantha.
Okay, well, Barbara actually stole a couple of questions, but I'm a writer, so I have a technical writing
Yeah.
question. I found it fascinating that you wrote it in present tense. I'm just so used to past tense, so that kind of like threw me at first. Just wondering if there's like a reason you wrote it in present tense, or?
It's just the way it came to me. I write most of my work in present tense, actually, and I don't really know why. To me, it increases and enhances the immediacy of it, and I think that suspenseful reads are really good in present tense. Yeah, I don't know. It's almost as if I'm a fly on the wall describing what's going on. Yeah, and so most of what I read is in present tense, and most of my fiction stuff is in present tense. Well, Catherine, did you have something first?
Yeah, it's really kind of a question because I know how busy you are.
Yeah.
When did you find the time?
Oh, man, I gotta tell you.
do a lot, you know.
That is why it took me 4.5 years to write this, or 4 years to write the book, because so I started it in 2018. I was National Novel Writing Month happens every year in November. Yay, NaNoWriMo. And I was already working on something else, but I got this idea and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. So I outlined it in October and I started writing it in November. And that November, I had strep throat, norovirus, right after, twice, strep throat twice, norovirus, and then I was on vacation for a week. And so I was like really just not in a space to be writing, but I like made myself do it. I forced myself to do it. And you have to write 50,000 words in a month in order to win NaNoWriMo. I got 50,010, and then I went to sleep. I was like on November 30th, I was just like, I am finished with life, and passed out. So I started it there, and I had this draft, and it was terrible, and it was awful, and like 0 words of it are actually in this book because it was that bad. And like I told you, I had to edit out all of these voices and stuff, but I put it down for a really long time after that. I did some editing, but really I focused on my essay writing during that time. And picked it up a little bit, and then I got into a novel writing class, and that was super exciting because I had my 2 older kids were born already, and they were in school. My younger son wasn't born yet, and so they were in school. I had like 6 hours a day, and it was glorious. And I got pregnant again, and I was like, cool. And so I knew my son was going to be born around April. He was really due at the end of March, and he came on April 12th. But I told my writing instructor, I go, I don't know if I'm going to finish this. She's like, yes, you are. Would it help you if I gave you a deadline? So that combined with, like, my husband definitely helps out a lot. Now that my son is a little bit older, I have a little bit more time. But yeah, it's kind of a slog. I get 1 day a week to write right now for like 4 or 5 hours. And that's pretty much all I get to work on the book, which is the sequel, which is coming soon. So it's hard to find the time is the answer to that question. If I can write, 3,000 words a week, the book is about 90,000 words, so I'll do the math there. So you can finish a draft in 6 months to a year, but at that pace, but you still have to edit it and proofread and package it and all of that stuff. So. Barbara and then Kate.
Hearing you talk about parts of the book that got kind of chopped out and left behind with stories of other characters is kind of interesting. I hadn't heard you talk about that before. And some of my favorite authors, like Patrick Robbins and others, have been releasing in collections of short stories that type of thing, where something that happened within the scope of the book, say the wind or those things,
Yeah.
you get to see something from the point of view of one of those characters as its self-contained short story.
That's cool.
And specifically the way you described that about being particularly lyrical and strong. That's the kind of thing I've seen done. So the question is, would that be something you could be interested in pursuing, finding a collection with other authors to write in a book like that?
That would be super fun, I think. I recently participated in a prompt party with a group of fiction writers, and I wrote a short story. It's 1,000 words, very short. It didn't take me that long, like maybe 2 or 3 hours, but it happens in the world of when we were mothers. And I actually think that that's a really good thing to do. So I've been resisting doing that because I know how long it takes me to write fiction. But then I realized after 4 years of it doesn't take me that long anymore. So I'm very resistant to writing shorter stories because I really want to focus on the big books, right? But I feel a lot better about writing those shorter stories now. No, it's just to find some authors that like have the same genre as me, which is a lot harder. But Meg is a good choice. Meg Ellison, I think is the way you're supposed to pronounce her last name. I think I said it wrong, but she is fantastic. So if you liked my book and you want to read anything in that same genre, she's a good author to check out. What other questions? Oh yeah, Kate, sorry.
Yeah. You were talking about how you have to think about the reader and suspense and things that sell and whatnot, but I'm sure still there's an aspect of less is more and focus and
Yes.
saying that number of characters and voices. If you didn't have to worry about that, what sort of an idea or aspect that you would have included at the top of the list?
I think more about the garden. I think that garden and the idea of the society was really beautiful.
I loved the garden.
Yeah, I really do. And it always, I don't know, it gives me a little bit of like cringe to talk about it or to like think about this like secret society, and I feel like I'm being kind of nerdy, which I guess I am. But yeah, I mean, I really do think the idea of having this big, enormous space where you can just go and you can tend the earth and it's quiet and it's oxygenated and it's bright and like it just makes me feel good, especially in a big city like this story happens in. So yeah, I probably would include a lot more about the garden and the relationships and the people in the garden and sort of how that worked.
And I have one other
Yeah,
thing.
do it.
In this process, what's something that you learned that surprised you?
How to word this? I don't want to say it's that stories have to have a plot. That's actually not exactly it. It's really more that readers crave often to connect with their characters. And some of the biggest feedback that I got before I did all of my revisions was, I don't connect with the characters, and my favorite, real people don't talk like this. That was from my writing instructor. And what she was really trying to do was give me more voice for my characters, right? And I don't do the best job of character voice, especially because there are a lot of different characters in the book, and they all kind of talk like I would talk for the most part. But because I was a scientific writer for so many years, I was really being quite scientific with the way I was describing things. And I realized as I was going through my last round of edits, I was like, oh, like he placed his, drinking receptacle on the, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure that was probably in there somewhere, but things like that where he's just like, no, just like use the simple language that people would actually use when they're describing something. You don't have to be all like technical about it. Yeah, I think so. And just thinking, and again, putting myself into the reader's perspective. And I notice this now, of course, because writers are the worst readers in the world. If I'm reading a book and it has a bunch of that, I definitely notice it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like who wrote this thing? So I have to listen to it on Audible if it's like that. It could be the best story in the world, but if the voice doesn't really draw me in and I really want to know what the story is, I have to listen to it, because otherwise my eyes are just going to be drawn to receptacle and, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Carl.
What are some authors that you enjoy or inspire you?
That's a great question. So I've mentioned Meg almost every time. Meg Ellison is amazing, and the reason I mention her is because she's a much better writer than I am. And especially the book of The Unnamed Midwife is just beautifully lyrical and sparse and also like really apocalyptic. And it's sort of like, if you've ever watched The Walking Dead, it kind of starts on that note, like somebody wakes up in the hospital and 90% of the world is dead. And then under the resultant ratio is 10 men to every 1 woman. And that dynamic really shapes the way the world ends up working. So I really love that series. So I will always mention Meg. The earliest adult writer that I read was Stephen King, and I really always loved Stephen King's stories. I now going back and reading them, I don't love the writing as much as as I love the stories. Christopher Pike was also another one. So I don't know if you guys remember Christopher Pike, but like when I was in, I don't know, 5th grade, 6th grade, I started reading these like young adult novels by Christopher Pike. They're all always like suspense and murder and like very, but in a very like young adult kind of kid-friendly way. Trying to think of anybody else that I've just really loved recently. Say again?
The Arc of the Scythe, the series of the Arc of the Scythe. Neil Schusterman? Any of those? Neil
No.
Schusterman?
No, I don't know.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I just,
futuristic and
yeah.
there's some overlap with ideas.
Oh, good. I'll have to look it up.
Wrestling with technology and
Yeah.
They're well written. They're well
John
written.
Scalzi too.
Good. Say again?
John Scalzi. It's written a bunch of good books.
Okay.
Dispatcher, things like that.
Okay.
I think you like
Colleen
that one.
Hoover.
All right. Colleen Hoover's all right. Unpopular opinion. I just read one by Rachel Barenbaum, who's a local author. It's called Atomic Anna, and if you like time travel feminist stories, that one's a really, really good one. It's super, super great. There's a ton more, I'm sure. Hugh Howey actually is the author that got me into writing, that like made me think like, oh, I can do this, which I guess maybe isn't such a reflection on his talent for writing, but he definitely can tell a good story. And his one of his series is actually on Apple TV starting like in a month or 2 maybe. It's called Silo. I think it's called Silo. It's about a post-apocalyptic civilization living in underground silos. And I don't know, I really loved it. I know some people don't love it as much as me. I've read it like 2 or 3 times. I really liked it. Any other questions before we sign some books? Hannah says no. Sarah, what's up?
So this is something I wonder about authors just in general, without giving anything away. How far into the process did you know where the 2 characters were going to end up? How far did you know the ending, or was it more sort of fluid?
That's a really great question. I didn't know what the ending was until the book was done. I thought that, what I really thought I was going to do is leave it on a cliffhanger and be like, ooh, like now there's a thing happening, and then you see like some like FBI memo, and so you know what's going on. What's that?
Thank you for not
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, and it's funny because we talk about the agenting process and the querying process, and what I was told is that you can't sell a book that isn't a standalone as a debut author. And so one of the reasons that I didn't do that is because I wanted to sell the book to a publishing house, but I am really glad that I did, because I don't think it wasn't a strong ending. I think I probably did that way because I didn't know how I was going to end it, right? But I am notoriously bad at beginnings and endings. So I still don't know how the sequel is going to end, even though I already started writing it. But I think, and you can tell me, you finished it, right? What did y'all think of the ending? Do you think it worked? Do you think it did what it what it needed to do?
I thought it worked. I thought it tied it up, but also left it open for wanting more.
Yeah, that was really what I was trying to do, right? And kind of like I think of the end of Hunger Games, where there is an ending, but you know that there's a broader story that can be told next, and so that's what I hope to do next January. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. I have books here for you to grab, and I will sign them for you. And I appreciate you coming and supporting me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job. You too. Thank you.